Welcome to the Primetime Podcast, everybody. My name is Nick, and today, hopefully you guys are doing well whenever you're checking out this latest episode of the podcast here. This is episode 7 for you guys, hosted on the MVG Nick YouTube channel. Hopefully you guys are doing well whenever you're checking out the podcast that talks about all things in the world of TV, news, reviews, commentaries, and more. And today we got a good discussion for you guys today. This is something that's been on my mind for a couple of weeks now, and something that I really wanted to talk about in a long form video like this. Admittedly, it's going to be a little more scatterbrained than my typical podcast, not as much structuring with this one, but just a few random topics that I want to go over with you guys, and I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts as well on it in the comments, as always there. But the general kind of theme or the general kind of connection that all of these different discussions are surrounding here is going to be the role that we play as TV fans, as the audience of these different shows here, and how that affects the shows, the networks, and how TV is constructed overall. And it's a very broad topic. There's a lot of different things to go over, which is why I want to dissect it into different subcategories as we'll go through the podcast for. And the first one that I want to talk about here is simply just what shows currently on TV are doing well and which ones are not. If you saw the previous episode of the podcast, then you might know that we are using SpoilerTV.com here for the last couple of them, actually, to talk about current shows that are on network TV right now and some of the recent debuts that these shows had, looking at the different sort of Nielsen ratings they had, the IMDb scores. And since then, it's been a few weeks or so, and many other shows have since debuted their first episode, as well as the previous shows that we've talked about have maintained themselves and obviously have released additional episodes since then. And what we have pulled up here, this article, is what they're calling the Broadcast Cancellation Predictor Table. This is something they update every once in a while on this website. I would say about at least once or twice a week here. And it's essentially a chart to give you an indication what shows are most likely to be canceled at the end of the season and which ones are good for another season to get renewed for. Before we actually get into the chart here, I want to scroll down and show you this little section at the bottom here. Specifically, number 4 is what I want everyone to focus on here. These are the main factors that go into giving these shows the score that they have and the ordering on this chart. And the majority of it is going to come down to simply what numbers these shows are doing right now as far as their overall viewers, the 18 to 49 demographic, which if you know anything about network TV, that is the main sort of demographic that they are after, as well as the +7 numbers, which is a totally, different, a little more complicated as far as the calculations go. But those are the main things that weigh into this score that this website is giving these shows, and then the ordering, of course, on the chart, as we'll just look at in a minute here. But there's a ton of other elements that go into it as well. You can see here listed, they have the day that they're on, the network that they're on, things like DVD sales, production costs, the contracts for the cast, syndication rights, the online popularity, the online ratings for these shows if they're on streaming services, for example, things like the critical reviews, the fans, are they talking about it on social media, things like that. There's a lot of different elements to break down here, so it's not as black and white as just saying this show has, say, 5 million viewers and this one has 2 million. There's a lot more that goes into it there. So as we go through here, I want you guys to pay attention specifically to the types of shows that are doing better or worse, what genre they're in, what networks they're on, if they're new or not, do they have, sort of status quo within the TV sphere? Are they, a show that's been on for, 10 plus seasons, or are they a show that is brand new for this season here? This is updated as of the 19th, which was a couple days ago, as I record this, 3 days ago, actually. And some of these shows have since, debuted. additional episodes in the last couple days, but this is of the 19th. And this has been constantly updated since the beginning of the season. So some of these shows have shifted in terms of where they have landed on this chart. Some of them have been steady throughout the season so far and have gradually improved their chances. Some of them have been going downhill. It just depends on the show, of course. But let's go into it and take a quick look at where some of these shows land. You can see here on the right the different color codes to indicate what sort of placement they have on this predictor table here. The red is the most likely to be canceled. That is if they have a score that is 4 or less. Definitely not a good sign for these shows here. Most likely, these are the ones that obviously are not doing the best here, are most likely to get canned to make way for better shows that are more profitable for these networks. The yellow is what they call on the bubble in the TV world, more or less just a 50-50 chance. Some of these shows might have one or two elements to them that might give them a better advantage later on. Maybe they have stronger social media presence. Maybe they're about to enter syndication and the network wants to get them to that point. Some of them might cost more or less. It just depends on, little things like that. But I would say, more or less likely about half of these shows have a good chance to get renewed. The other half, not so much. And then anything that is above 6 there in the green is what they call, in the safe zone. These ones are the most likely to get renewed for a second season. If it's in blue, it means it already has a contract written for it as another season. You can see down here some of the, bigger ones have already gotten it because they've shown themselves really, really strong for the 2021 season so far. Some of these have had contracts, from 3 or 4 years ago that extend out to years going forward, such as Young Sheldon, for instance. I know like 2 years ago or something, they had like a 3 or 4 year deal with CBS to contract it for previous or ongoing seasons rather. So that one's in blue. And then anything down here these are shows that have not yet aired for the season but will. And you can see like Blackish there is in purple, and This Is Us. Those are shows that are this is going to be their final season for it, and we've talked about that before on the channel as well. So let's go into some more specifics here and look at the shows that are on this chart here and see why they have landed in the spots they have. Beginning with the red shows like The Big Leap, Queens, which is brand new for this season, of course. Our Kind of People, we talked about that last time. A Million Little Things, and Bull, surprisingly, on CBS there. Now those first three, The Big Leap, Queens, and Our Kind of People, those are brand new shows, and a couple of those we've talked about before. The only one that we have not discussed is Queens here. That recently just aired its first episode on Tuesday as I record this, so just a few days ago. And it started off with really great critical reviews, surprisingly. I was looking at the numbers earlier, and it has currently a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, believe it or not, as well as a very, very strong fan response on IMDb. The pilot episode of the show, has an 8.8 on IMDb, which is certainly one of the strongest of any of the new shows we've seen so far for the season. But the unfortunate reality of it is the viewership was just not up to par with where ABC was wanting it. It's a very kind of unique, original idea. Is a drama, of course, has like a musical element to it, and features an all-black cast. Very, very unique for network TV in the last couple of years, and definitely had some big names behind it as well, such as Brandy and believe Tony Braxton was part of the cast as well. Features like some musicians as part of its lead cast, playing into the story, of course, as well there. But unfortunately only started off with 1.75 million viewers, which is far below standards, even for ABC, which, as many of you guys know, is not doing so hot this season. Well below where they were wanting the show to get. And as a result, it is in the red here. The Big Leap and Our Kind of People on Fox, we talked about that last time, had great lead-ins that should have gotten it a much stronger start there. Big Leap, specifically, that musical, doing the worst of any of these shows right now, has not maintained itself whatsoever. It's actually been going downhill over the last couple of weeks, and the most recent episode I saw, only about 1.2 million viewers there, which is really, really bad for a big, expensive, kind of elaborate drama like that that is going to obviously need to maintain itself stronger to circumvent the finances, that the show would require there. And then A Million Little Things, another one that we've talked about prior on the channel. This is its 4th season here, and a lot of fans are saying that the story, might gradually wrap up at this point anyway, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal if ABC decided to cancel this one, make room for some other shows, but as you've seen in previous podcasts, the numbers behind it are just not doing it justice whatsoever. Bull came back this year as well, again with very, very strong critical reviews. This is its 6th or 7th season. It's a pretty established drama, but again, just the interest in the audience has made this one not do so hot. It's kind of waning its interest more or less there, and unfortunately the lead-in from the sitcoms there just didn't really match up with it. Two very, very different demographics, of course, where those types of shows would be targeting, so unfortunately Bull here as well in the red. Moving on to the yellow, we do have a few new shows in this one as well, such as Ordinary Joe, CSI Vegas, and NCIS Hawaii. We've talked about Hawaii in the previous episode. That great lead-in that it had from NCIS there should have again had a very, very strong start to the season. Was a little bit under par with where CBS would normally have it, considering that it's a big spin-off of one of their most popular franchises, of course. CSI Vegas, we talked about again last time, super, super anticipated, right? One of the most anticipated shows of the entire season. Unfortunately, did not have a very strong start, though. Only about 5 or so million people for the pilot episode, and that's actually gone down quite a bit since then, only to about 3.5 million as of last week. So definitely a pretty disappointing start there as well. Some people might argue for Vegas specifically that the amount of competition against it, against the Chicagos and stuff, which are just absolutely crushing it right now, some of the top rated shows of the season there, was not able to compete with them as the sort of, premier dramas on TV right now, as well as the fact that it didn't really have the best marketing behind it. I saw some people who were fans of the original CSI, which of course it's what it's trying to call back to, bringing some of the original cast back and bringing back some of the setting and stuff. It's obviously it takes place in Vegas, which is where the original CSI did as well there. But some fans disappointed that it didn't really capture the same sort of energy as the original, I was reading as well. So just not a very, strong start to this show either. Just a little bit underwhelming overall. We have some other veteran dramas in the yellow here, such as The Rookie on ABC with Nathan Fillion. We have Magnum P.I. on CBS, part of their Friday night lineup against shows like Blue Bloods as well. We have a couple CW shows in here. CW, of course, not really the most important or the most famous of any of these networks, so no real surprises there that they're kind of struggling as well here. But the other one that a lot of people are asking the question of, is it going to get renewed, is Big Sky here. You guys may know, if you've seen some of my previous videos, that I am a big fan of this show, or previously was at least a big fan of this show. I thought season 1 was really, really great, really mysterious kind of cop drama. Had some really great thriller moments, really good suspense type moments as well in it. And season 2 recently debuted here as well, with the lead-in from Grey's Anatomy at 9 o'clock, which was a very, very strong move I credited ABC for. But unfortunately, again, competition on this one, going up against the Law and Orders, going up against football on Fox, right? Definitely had a bit of a stiff, competition to kind of go up against, and unfortunately just wasn't able to capture the same audience attention as some of those other shows. The positive, though, with that is that season 2, I have been reading a lot of fans very, very happy with the quality of it, going back to its roots, right? I've talked about previously that the first half of season 1 was fantastic, one of my favorites. back half of season 1 kind of let go at some of the storylines, introduced some new characters, kind of got a little convoluted. But from everything I've read, season 2 definitely came back and sort of tightened everything up again, and was much more consistent as it goes on for the previous season. There's some other numbers regarding it, just outside of the live viewership. The 18 to 49 demographic on this one pretty strong as well. So it has a few things about it that is kind of pulling itself up from being at the very bottom of the chart, but still not the most impressive numbers, and against a very, very steady competition there on Thursday nights now. Let's move on to the green here. Now, this is where I would slightly disagree with where Spoiler has some of these shows, because in my opinion, I would say anything between like 6 and 8 is kind of still in that kind of middle section, that 50-50 section, if you will. Definitely a stronger more likely to get renewed than some of these other shows here, but I would still argue not strong enough to guarantee it, like they kind of propose that some of these shows are. Some of those shows in there include The Wonder Years, for instance. We've talked about that many a times on the channel. We have stuff like The Good Doctor in here on CBS. We have The Resident as well. Some of the other Friday night dramas and Sunday night dramas on CBS, such as SWAT and Blue Bloods here. We have some sitcoms in here like The United States of Al and Bob Hart's Abishola as well on CBS. Chuck Lorre's sitcoms that are doing pretty strong here as well. We also have some that are, already renewed here. We can see like the Fox sitcoms here, the animated stuff. That's all doing really, really well as always, as well as New Amsterdam here on NBC, another medical drama that we've talked about. Has that built-in fan base, has a really, really dedicated fan base here. But two shows in particular that I want to go over a little bit more specifically, being The Good Doctor and The Resident here. Both of these in a very, very lucrative spot right now because they both are about to hit the benchmark necessary for syndication, which is a big, big factor in determining what these, what shows should be renewed and which ones should be canceled here. The average to get into it, the rule of thumb, if you will, is around 100 episodes or when it enters its 5th season here. Both of these shows currently in their 5th season and very, very fast approaching that 100 episode benchmark here. So very, very likely that those are going to get renewed, only for the fact that it'll have more material to show once they enter those syndication deals later down the road. And those are very, very lucrative, right? Very, very profitable. We're going to talk a little bit more about that specifically a little bit later in the podcast there. So definitely rooting for those. Definitely a fan of those myself as well. And then towards the top of the chart, if you will, I know it kind of looks the opposite way, but the shows that are doing really, really strong here, anything above 8, right? So the cutoff being around where Bob's Burgers is, right? So from that point onward, these are the shows that pretty much are guaranteed to get it. We have stuff up here like some of the new dramas like FBI International doing fantastic for CBS. We have La Brea on NBC. The only one of these like really, really original brand new shows, none of the spinoffs here, that is doing fantastic right now. Definitely the big surprise of the season, especially compared to stuff like Ordinary Joe or Queens or The Big Leap or anything like that as well here. We have the Law and Orders up here. You can see Organized Crime and SVU up here past 11, which is fantastic there. All the Chicago's up here, The Simpsons, all of those already renewed. Of course, those entering deals much a long time ago. They're kind of sustaining themselves out for a couple more years. The FBI is up here, and the biggest show currently on TV, just in terms of numbers here, and the most likely to get renewed, 911 here. The premiere episode for this season was fantastic. Critically, a lot of people really, really enjoying it there and having a great, great deal in terms of its live viewership there. It's actually gone up quite a bit since then, even on a really, really competitive night, which is Monday, going up against stuff like The Voice and the CBS sitcoms like The Neighborhood as well in that time slot, has been able to maintain it with the 18 to 49 demographic, which is fantastic there. Easily the biggest of any of the medical shows, any of the big dramas right now as well. Only above Chicago Fire there, which is the second of all of them there. You can see with well over 19 points on this chart here. So that kind of gives you a pretty, nice overview of what shows overall are doing well and which ones are not doing so well. There's, of course, tons of speculation on what shows will be able to sustain themselves going forward and which ones might have a steep drop-off come, winter when they take their hiatuses or when they have their mid-season finales. Tons of different speculations and theories on a ton of these new shows as well, or returning shows here. You can just kind of see a little bit of an overview. Many of these waiting until the spring to, enter or do their their premieres there for the season. So we'll have to wait and see how those align themselves as well there. But I wanted to start off with that because that was a really good way to kind of break the ice for this podcast here and take a look at just what people are interested in right now. And as you can tell by some of the trends here, the types of shows that are in the green versus ones in the red, you definitely see that they are legacy shows. They are big, big franchises with tons of spin-offs, right? Tons of just really, really big popular shows that people recognize. That's really the main sort of key to it all. Even some of the newer shows here up towards the top, like The Equalizer, for instance, that is a spin-off of one of the, or not a spin-off, but a reboot, rather, of a really, really old show from the 80s that was also turned into a movie back in like 2014 or something with Denzel Washington, led by the great Queen Latifah, of course, who's just an absolute legend in the world of TV and, of course, music. She did a long time ago as well there. You also have, of course, your Law & Orders, your Chicago's, right? Big Dick Wolf shows that always do well. Tons of, big sitcoms as well here, like the Goldbergs we talked about doing pretty well for itself. We have the Connors up here. Those are, of course, the biggest two on ABC right now in terms of their longevity, in terms of their status, compared to stuff like the Wonder Years, which is a little bit in that middle zone, only about 6 points, which is kind of not the best in terms of potential renewal there, and definitely stuff like Home Economics as well, which is just a big, big flop for season 2, even though featuring big actors on those shows like Don Cheadle for the Wonder Years and Topher Grace just did not have the same sort of, attention-building marketing as some of those other ones did. But the real takeaway from this is the amount of brand new original content that is unfortunately really struggling here to find its audience and find viewers there, such as The Big Leap, such as Queens, such as Our Kind of People. These are very unique, very original types of shows that you don't really see that often, especially on network TV. And there's a reason for that, because they just don't perform well. It's really as simple as that. And that leads us to our first main topic of the podcast here that I want to talk about, which is the idea that all of these reboots, all of these remakes and spin-offs and all these get announced year after year after year, equal amount of backlash and negative sort of press behind them, as well as tons of fans super excited, super optimistic to see what these networks have to show for them. And I want to pull up this article here that I found from Insider.com. This is a little bit old. This is from May of this year, so some of these shows have already aired, but it's called 28 TV reboots, remakes, and spinoffs that are in the works here. And if we just take a quick peek here, you'll see how many of these big name, big franchises, big series have planned reboots here. Some of these you might recognize, some of these might not, but all of these are incredibly popular, incredibly well-known series of some kind there. Starting off with a show like Dexter, right? That is premiering only in a couple weeks, actually, as I record this in November for the fall 21 schedule. And this is a very, very anticipated drama subtitled New Blood. many Dexter fans, including my good friend Mike, very, very excited for this one, coming off of the really infamous finale that Dexter had way back in the day. Many people would consider it one of the worst TV finales of all time here. Very, very interested in seeing how they're going to kind of recapture the magic of the early years of Dexter and see what they can do with this planned revival here. Very, very exciting for that. We have stuff like Oldish as well. Blackish, of course, the original of all these ish sitcoms by Kenya Barris. We had Blackish, of course, we had Mixedish, we had Grownish, we had a ton of them, and now there's another one called Oldish. Blackish, of course, one of my all-time favorite family sitcoms on ABC from back in the day. I've talked about it many a times, and all of the spin-offs that it's had, I think, are all pretty solid in their own right. None of them really doing anything, above and beyond that the original was doing back in the day, but still very solid for any Blackish fans out there. We also have a planned revival of Bewitched here, which is a really old show on ABC from the 1960s, you can see there. We have stuff like Conan the Barbarian here on Netflix. We have The Jetsons on ABC. We have Jodie on Comedy Central. We have Rugrats on Nickelodeon, which actually premiered already earlier this year. You can see back in May, and that was a really big premiere for them. A lot of people very much excited for that one there. One of the biggest in terms of any brand new cartoons that have come out over during this year as well here. Gossip Girl on HBO Max, huge drama from back in the day. We have Dune here, upcoming movie as well that actually just got released. Grease as well on Paramount Plus there. We have The Many Saints of Newark, right? Movie that is a spinoff of The Sopranos. It's a prequel to The Sopranos. Really excellent movie. Highly recommended there. Clueless on Peacock here. We have Gremlins. We have And Just Like That, which is the planned revival of Sex and the City. Of course, one of the best TV shows of all time for many people. iCarly, right, on Paramount Plus, the planned spin-off or reboot, whatever you want to call it there, sequel almost, where they're grown-ups now. One of my favorites of the year. Definitely recommend that one. We have stuff like House of the Dragon here, planned prequel to Game of Thrones on HBO. Game of Thrones, of course, needs no introduction there. One of the biggest franchises on TV. We have plenty of stuff for The Walking Dead, right? Walking Dead, one of the best sci-fi dramas of all time there. One of my favorites, already has plenty of spinoffs on TV right now, and a couple more you can see here. One that's supposed to be a spinoff for the characters of Carol and Daryl, two of my favorites. Definitely going to check that out when it comes out in a couple years, as well as Tales from the Walking Dead, another one here. We have stuff like the Power Rangers reboot that's planning on coming out. Power Rangers, of course, a franchise that's been redone over and over again, endlessly. So Frasier was announced. They're bringing back Kelsey Grammer for that. We have stuff like Nash Bridges here. We have so many different examples here that I could go on and on. But I think you guys get the point here, and that's not even scraping the surface, right? On my notes here are some of the shows that didn't make this list. We also have stuff like LA Law and Night Court, which are some old 80s shows. LA Law, of course, great detective show from back in the 80s. They're planning on coming back to ABC this spring, as well as Night Court, a really great sitcom from back in the day on NBC here, planning to come back this spring as well. The recent announcements for That 90s Show and How I Met Your Father on streaming, from some of the best 2000s sitcoms, How I Met Your Mother and That 70s Show, respectively there. Supposed Ally McBeal revival there. That one's more speculation than anything else, but considering how many of these other shows they've already done, wouldn't not surprise me at all. Ally McBeal, one of the best legal dramas out there from the 2000s as well. So again, you guys get the point. I don't need to go on and on about why all of these shows are coming back the way they are. And the simple answer is simply because of the fact that people still love these shows, right? They love these characters. They want to see what's been going on with some of these characters' lives. They want to see the continuation of some of these plots and these stories here. All of these shows, in one way or another, have touched so many people over the years and became so iconic and so popular because they were of a particular quality that touched so many people there. Because the simple truth is, if they weren't good, they wouldn't have become so famous in the first place there. And even if a show has gone on for so long, think of something like SVU, for instance, right? SVU, the longest running drama of all time, you can still manage to get a ton of people interested with very, very simple key phrases or something in the marketing, right? And my go-to example for this, actually, that just aired last night as I record this, was the 500th episode of SVU there. You think about that, show has been on for 2 decades, well over 2 decades at this point, and you still see over 4 million people a week watching this show all that time later. It's because that show has touched so many people and has just become such a great example of what these shows can do with such a simple idea and make it as effective as can possibly be here. As we talked about earlier, syndication as well, one of the biggest factors in determining some of these shows fates as far as their cancellation or their renewal here. And I have a couple examples to go over with you as well here for some older sitcoms here. We're going to start off with Friends. This is something that I was reading on their Wikipedia page a couple days ago. And what inspired me to go over with Friends is their recent reunion special they did on HBO Max earlier this year, which was a lot of fun. Me not being that big of a Friends fan, I actually really enjoyed it. I love to see sort of the behind the scenes and some of the interviews with the cast all this time later. I think that's a really special thing that very, very few shows can do well and can be very genuine with, right, without it feeling kind of forced or disingenuous in some way. And Friends is one of the few that I was really, really interested in seeing what's happened with all these people, because it's just such a phenomenon, such a juggernaut in terms of the TV sitcom landscape. And it was really, really exciting for all of them to come back and kind of revisit each other after all that time. But in the lieu of that, I was also reading on their syndication tab here on Wikipedia. You can see that even after all this time, right, Friends left air back in 2004, nearly 2 decades ago, it still manages to generate over $1 billion a year. And that's been going on for, like I said, over 2 decades now, or nearly 2 decades since its last episode there. And that translates to about $20 million annually for all of the main cast there, for all of the main 6 cast members, because they get about 2% of all the revenue from these syndication deals there. And that's what I'm saying, how lucrative and how important syndication is for some of these shows. There's tons of shows out there that I personally have discovered through syndication, watching on cable or my local stations here in Detroit, and just have become some of my favorites of all time there. Friends, of course, one that gets played constantly all the time. You could probably turn on cable and find a station right now if you wanted playing Friends. And it's because people absolutely love it, right? It's a show that is relatable, it's funny, it's aged surprisingly well over time. Obviously, there's some things about it, that people will still disagree with and have, their problems with, just like any good show. But overall, it's still one that gets a ton of attention and is very respected all this time later, and people are still watching it, upwards that they can generate over $1 billion annually from just reruns of these shows. Another great example would be Seinfeld here, another classic sitcom, landed as number 1 on my list of the best TV shows of all time there. Many people would consider it one of the funniest, one of the most influential shows of the 90s there. If we go to their syndication tab, it's actually even stronger than Friends. This was back reported in 2010 here that it made around $2.7 billion, nearly 3 times the amount of Friends. And just a few years later in 2017, made an estimated $4 billion there in syndication. And again, this is just the reruns on TV that you might find on TBS or FX or Comedy Central, one of those, or your local syndication stations wherever you live there, local affiliates that'll play reruns there. That's not counting any merchandise, not counting any streaming, not counting any other forms like DVDs, like we mentioned earlier. This is just one small factor in the legacy of these shows. There, think about all those other things put together, how much these shows can make. Right, TV is extremely lucrative over the years there. And that's why I feel like it's so important to highlight why these reboots and why these remakes are so popular in terms of an option for these TV networks, because look at the results, right? Seinfeld, Friends, all of these older sitcoms, I'm sure you could pull up some staggering results, right? The Office, for instance, as well, I know is another one recently got put on Peacock, right? And that was a big deal because it was the most streamed Netflix show like ever, right? Over anything original, over like Stranger Things or 13 Reasons Why or anything like that, these big elaborate dramas. People were interested in watching a show about people work at an office that was, 2 decades old at that point, right? 15 years old. And it's just funny to me that is a more, that appeals more to people after all this time, because it's such a relatable, simple concept there that is executed with such a high class and such a, positive energy surrounding it, that these networks, first of all, people would be willing to watch that, over the course of 15 years. But in addition, these big, networks that could put all those resources into a more elaborate, more entertaining, brand new concept would choose to bid on these old sitcoms just to have the right to them for people to watch them, right? So now if you wanted to watch The Office, you have to get Peacock because that's the only place that has it, right? That's the only place that has it. Seinfeld, another example there, recently moved to Netflix. It was originally on Hulu. Once again, my buddy Mike, who I'll probably be referencing quite a bit, actually got Hulu not too long ago and was planning to watch Seinfeld on it, but when they took it off, they brought it to Netflix. He wasn't able to watch it, unfortunately, and now if he wants to watch it, he has to get Netflix, right? Because that's the streaming service that has it. And they put out a whole big announcement trailer. There were a bunch of TV promos promoting it, the idea that this 30-year-old sitcom is coming back to Netflix, and they promoted it like it was a brand new show, like it was the most original concept idea. And it turns out it was just Seinfeld, which I just thought that was so funny that they made a whole uproar about it for a show that, of course, a lot of people love. And as a result, Netflix's earnings, went up surprisingly, extremely high because of that, because people love Seinfeld there. So to anyone out there that is, always complaining, right? Always, kind of frustrated with the idea that these reboots, that these, remakes are always coming out year after year and feels like Hollywood doesn't have any new ideas. Well, it's simply because of the fact that people will still watch them, right? I talk to people about this all the time about, when these shows get released, when these, shows get announced, what are their feelings on it? Are they upset by it? Are they optimistic? And most of the time, I think people are more surprisingly positive than it might come off of. I know for me, I'm always interested in seeing what some of these new reboots have. When the iCarly reboot was announced, like we talked about earlier, that became one of my favorite shows of the entire year. It might be my favorite show of the year. How I Met Your Father, right, on Hulu. That is going to be one of my most anticipated for next year when that comes out, because How I Met Your Mother is my all-time favorite show. And I always think that's a really, really interesting idea to take, a new cast, a new kind of direction for these shows and see exactly where they can go with it, see if they can improve even upon the original. But I know many people don't like that idea. I know many people, will always complain. They'll be more cynical from it. And the solution to it, as simple as it sounds, it really is more effective. Support these brand new shows, right? I want to see more people support shows that get to the point like La Brea is, right? Sitting at a very comfortable 9.12 here. Very, very likely to get a second season there. A lot of people enjoying that one. But for all of those, brand new shows that really smash it and that really, hit it out of the park and do very, very well, there's tons of them, like your Ordinary Joes, like your Our Kind of People, like your Big Leaps, that don't do well, that flop tremendously there. And if you don't want reboots, if you don't want spin-offs for these shows, you have to support these ones. You have to get out there. You got to get the word out for it. And people are just not interested in doing that. So those are my thoughts on it. Of course, if you have any agreements or disagreements on it, you can feel free to leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one. That is definitely one of the most interesting topics for me to discuss. I think definitely very, very fascinating to see all the different perspectives on it there. As we go forward with our next topic, let's talk about some of the other debates in regards to TV. Another one that's been on my mind recently, as there's one show in particular that kind of sparked this, debate and something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and that show is Squid Game here. A show that everyone is talking about right now, probably the biggest show on TV at the moment here. Of course, a big Netflix original here. Is easily one of the most original and kind of unique concepts that we've seen in a long time. Definitely not a spin-off or reboot of anything for sure. Captured the world's imagination, right? And in all this time, the one debate that I feel like has sparked due to the sudden obsession with Squid Game here is the conversation surrounding TV, whether you want to binge it and it's on streaming, or whether you think traditional formats like watching it week to week on network TV, which one is superior there. And for me, if you just asked me this, out of the, blue, if you just wanted to get my opinion on it, I would say week to week is the way to go. I think that is the best way to watch TV. I think it's the best way to experience TV. And here are my reasonings for it. And I'm going to use Squid Game as an example here because this is the last show, the most recent show, rather, that I binged through, right? I, just like everyone else, was constantly bombarded with material from Squid Game on social media, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Reddit, on, TikTok. Everywhere I went, could not escape Squid Game, right? And so I finally caved in. My buddy Mike, once again, was kind of the forefront for it. He messaged me and my buddy my brother rather, and said he watched through Squid Game and he really enjoyed it and highly recommended. So I was like, all right, I'll finally watch it. I'll put my grievances aside and I'll watch it. And I did over the course of 3 days. The first day, I watched the first 5 episodes, thoroughly enjoyed it, was very, very much into the story, got hooked on it right away. Then the next day, I watched the next 3 episodes, which I thoroughly enjoyed as well. But I was purposely saving the finale, right? The big finale for its own day that I wanted to just put aside, make it a very, very special watch for me because I heard so many good things about it. All of the, little subliminal things were coming together. The storyline was going to wrap up. There was that great twist at the end that everyone was talking about. They actually play the Squid Game itself in the finale, as many of you know, which was kind of the whole, idea of the show in the first place there leading up to it. And so I wanted to put that, aside and watch it on its own day. And when I finally got to it, I kind of felt disappointed, admittedly. I was not as big of a fan of the finale as I felt like I should have been, considering all of the hype and all of the praise that it was getting from, everyone online there. And when I went to do some research on it, I found out that I was not the only one here. This is on IMDb here. Actually, let's go back for just a second here. You can see the overall rating on it is an 8.2 out of 10, right? From a ton of different reviews there. You can see over 200,000 reviews there of Squid Game. So it's a very, very lucrative, very popular show right now, of course. And many people enjoy it. I would give it about an 8.5. So I would say it's around that same sort of score for me. Definitely felt like it was a very unique, original idea, executed very well, had a lot of mystery to it, had some great action to it. Overall, a very, very solid show. But the one thing that I did notice afterwards, after I finished it, was the amount of people as well in my same boat that were a little let down by this finale here. And the main sort of argument I have for it is the IMDb episode scores here. You can see the pilot episode here, Red Light, Green Light, one of everyone's favorites there, 8.4, right? So a very, very strong start. A little bit lower for the second episode, Hell. We have 7.6, and then we go back up into the 8s for a little while. It shifts up and down, admittedly. This one where they play the marbles, right? This is what, episode 6 here, 9.3. This is the highlight of the show. Definitely one of my favorites. But as we go to the final episode here, right? One Lucky Day, you can see the final episode of the show only has a 7.6 out of 10 there, tied lowest of all the episodes, along with the episode Hell here as well at a 7.6. And you might think, well, that's weird because everyone, loves this finale, right? Everyone was saying this was a great finale, had that great twist, everything came together at the end, really, really satisfying conclusion. Well, that episode doesn't have the best score online. The numbers don't lie there. And I just find that very, very interesting to theorize, why that might be. Because objectively, so the twist at the end and everything was executed really well, right? No one's debating that. No one is debating that it's not a good show, and that the finale is done in a way that kind of undermines everything. It's not like that. But my biggest proposal as to why a lot of people were kind of let down by it was the fact that they binged it instead of taking their time with it. Because of the fact that it was on streaming, because all the episodes were available right out of the gate there, they were all released on the same day, it felt very much like you had to get to the end as quick as possible to be part of the discussion there. Obviously, the show has a lot of death in it. There's a lot of serious moments where some significant characters go through tragedy, and a lot of them die, of course. And because of that, you can't really look through message boards, you can't really look through forums or look on Reddit to see all these theories until you finish the show. So it encourages people to watch as quickly as they can, right? Get through it in a weekend, get through it in an entire day, right? The whole series, instead of taking their time, letting the episodes breathe in between them and theorize as you go on there. And then, once you're done with it, you're going to binge all the theory videos, all the behind-the-scenes videos, all of the discussions online there, without really feeling like you accomplished that, or you really got to it in a more genuine light like you would with a week-to-week watch there. I know many people that, especially when the show first, was kind of getting some traction and getting some hype surrounding it, were gradually, making their way through it, maybe watching a couple episodes a night. Maybe it took them, a week or so to get through it. But as soon as it blew up and once everyone was talking about it, new viewers like Mike, watched it in an entire day, right? Which I think is kind of preposterous when you really break it down. Just to say that, they finished it instead of really taking their time to savor it and satisfy it like you would with a traditional standard of watching. So that's kind of my theory on it, because personally, like I said, I didn't think the finale was as good as a lot of people, said it was, and there were some things that were a little more see-through, especially after you go through the theories. They kind of sprinkle in a lot of hints that you can kind of predict what's going to happen, especially if you've watched it, again, since then. But overall, still not a bad show by any means. But could it have been as good as, was it executed as good as it could have been? I would say no, right? I think there's plenty of other dramas out there, plenty of other shows just on regular network TV that are doing it so much better because they allow viewers to take their time with it. And just as an example here, let's go over Chicago PD. This is one of my favorite shows on TV right now. Of course, you guys know I love the Chicago shows and the Dick Wolf shows as a whole here. It's rated at an 8.1 on IMDb, so about the same as where Squid Game is. But if we go to the episodes here, I want to go to Season 8, which is last year's season, through the 2020 to 2021 season. So the most recent complete one that we have here. Started off kind of weak with an opener, only about 7.6, but gradually steadily rose up here. Throughout the 8s, you can see a bit more consistent than where Squid Game was there until we get to the final couple of episodes here. The final couple of episodes here, you can see it goes from, a 7.9 to an 8.0 to an 8.8, has a really stark jump. And then the final episode of the season here, we get a 9.2. Easily one of the biggest and best finales of recent memory for me, easily one of my favorites there, and on par with where the top episode of Squid Game is. Translating that to the the next season rather, which is the one that is currently airing, season 9. We start off with a great opener here with an 8.7, and it is much more consistent through the 8s there. You can see 8.4 until we get another 9 in there, 9.3, even stronger than the finale. This most recent episode, admittedly, not the best, right? Only about a 7 there, so we can brush that one off. It was a Kevin episode, and if you know, you know. Let's just leave it at that. But for now, a very, very strong season so far with a great, great episode. Not built up as a finale, not built up as a mid-season finale, nothing. Just a great, consistent episode right in the middle there in the 9s. So for anyone that says, that network TV can't compete with where streaming is or these more premium dramas, take a look at the numbers, guys. They do not lie, and this is a great example of it, on par, if not exceeding, where Squid Game is there by comparison. One other thing about week-to-week watching, which I think is really interesting to note here, is you'll see, especially on Reddit, like if you go into the discussions about these shows or the debates between whether you prefer streaming or week-to-week watching, one thing that you really get a sense of is people that do like to take their time with it and like to let the episodes kind of speak for themselves and not rush through a show. They really do have a more optimistic sense in general about TV as a whole, I think. I think they really more passionately give TV a stronger inflection that it's art, and that it's supposed to be speaking to a higher plane rather than just being entertainment, right? As I think most people do. And that is really something interesting that I've discovered over the last few weeks or so doing research for this podcast. Is you find a sense that people who just kind of binge through shows, just kind of rush through them, don't really appreciate these ones for as much as they could, right? And as much as these people want you to. If that makes sense. I know that's kind of confusing, but essentially just, a show like Squid Game, for instance, was just entertainment, right? It was just, something that was unique and kind of original that a lot of people latched onto because it's not really something they've seen before. Whereas something like Chicago PD, which is more serialized and has some deeper topics to it, often talking about real world issues behind it, police brutality and racism and things like that. There's more of a conversation surrounding those things, and it makes it better for discussion, which is why the week-to-week format works a lot better for this type of show. One other thing I wanted to mention with Squid Game here is the fact that the show became so big and so popular now that people are, so eager and so antsy for a second season, right? This is something that you can find pretty much anywhere right now. If you just search up for the show, find tons and tons of forum threads, tons of Reddit threads, theorizing and asking where's season 2, right? What's going to happen in season 2? What characters are going to come back? Are these characters actually dead? There's tons of theories out there saying that these characters might not actually be dead and they might return for season 2. Is it going to be a prequel? Is it going to be a sequel? Are we going to see more games? What could those games be? There was a whole Watch Mojo video just released about 10 games that could work for season 2. Some of the theories want to see a prequel for the front man, right? Where did his origin story come from? What is his role within the show? Some people want to see take place in other countries, right? There were some little hints throughout the show saying that there are multiple Squid Games throughout the world, right? And not just focused in Korea, but maybe one in the U.S. or Europe or somewhere else there. So there's all these different things floating around right now, all these different theories and whatnot. And the creator of this show has since announced that if he does do a season 2, he wants to make it as good as possible, and he wants to bring in a team to write some of the episodes. I'm sure many people know this already, but it was just one person wrote through the entire show and wrote all the scripts and directed all the episodes, and it took him a long time to get to that point. he started developing the show way back in 2009 and took him 10 years to finally successfully pitch it to Netflix, which picked it up back in 2019. Production lasted a couple years. It was a little bit delayed because of COVID, because they were working against that. But when it finally dropped in September of this year here, finally, after all that hard work, after all that time, finally got to see his creation come to life and it become the biggest Netflix show ever, and all these fans and everyone enjoying it like crazy. But then they only managed to, they watch it over the course of a weekend or something, and you compare that to how long it took him to actually get it made, and it just feels like, these people are not giving it the time of day that it truly deserves, right? And he, for a long time, the writer and director, said he didn't want to make a season 2. He only wanted it to keep it at one season. He felt like it wrapped up very nicely, and he was very, very satisfied with where it had ended. And now, after all of this discussion and after all the hype, he has now since changed his mind on that, and he said it might be there might be a season 2, but he's going to take his time on it, which I definitely commend him for, right? I only want to see a season 2 of it if that's what he wants and if that's what the cast wants. I don't want it to be because he's trying to satisfy people. I don't want it to be because Netflix is making him do it because it was super successful for him. I only want to do it. I only want to see it happen if he feels like it truly deserves to be that way, and for no other reason, right? And that's one of the main criticisms I have with streaming in general, is I feel like it puts these creators and these production crews at sort of a disadvantage to constantly come up with ideas and constantly work for new seasons and create new episodes at just such a fast pace that they don't truly have time to develop and kind of and make these episodes as quality as they could be, because they're working so hard to just get them out to people. And as a result of that, sometimes you see on streaming and shows that get really big way too quick, a consistent level of quality that starts off really, really great and then completely capsizes as the show goes on for. One of my go-to examples for this is another Netflix show that just a few years ago absolutely blew up, and there was like no turning back on it, and that was 13 Reasons Why here. This is a drama that we've talked about quite a bit in some previous videos in our drama tournament. We talked quite a bit about it. On IMDb currently, it has even more reviews than Squid Game, well over 270,000 there, and it's sitting at a 7.5. Not a bad score by any means. They're a pretty sizable score for 13 Reasons Why there. But when you look at where it could have been, considering the first season, how amazing it was, how, incredibly rich and, interesting and fascinating all of the plots were, it should have been, in retrospect, a much, much bigger and much more, prized show than it actually became. Looking at the scores here, we have, in the 8s here for the pilot, 8.3, low 8s to high 9s throughout the seasons here, or throughout the first season, rather. Then, middle of it gradually goes up to about an 8.6, which is, very, very strong for IMDb, until we get to the last few episodes, which just absolutely blow up in the 9s there, and we get a great string of them up until the first season's finale there, which is at a 9.2, which to this day is still the highest rated episode of the entire show there. Easily my favorite of the entire season. Great finish for the first season of 13 Reasons there. And I definitely, once I finished it, I was satisfied with that. I felt like the first season, that could have been its own show. It should have ended right there. It had a great, satisfying finish. There wasn't really a need to go into a season 2. It didn't, leave off with a cliffhanger, unlike Squid Game. It should have just wrapped up right then and there, and that should have been the end of it. But of course, because the show became so big and because it was so influential in creating this kind of, new trend of binge watching these shows, and it was kind of the first to do that on a major scale, like it became one of Netflix's biggest, of course. They instantly rushed into a season 2, which premiered no less than a year later, which I think is is not enough time to properly develop a show like this for the streaming sort of format, because in a traditional way, you see traditional network shows get a yearly release, right? So it's fall of 2021, fall of 2022, fall of 2023, so on and so forth. But in between there, they have time to adjust and they have time to fix up these scripts, if something isn't working there. But when you do it on Netflix, for instance, where it's all going to be released at the same time there, if something isn't working throughout the season, if, from episode 1 to episode 2 to episode 3, something doesn't feel right, you have time before the end to adjust it and to make, corrections to improve the season. But on Netflix and stuff, you don't have that ability. So that's one of the main reasons why I think binging is kind of hard to write for and hard to produce for, because you're never really sure what the audience is supposed to expect before they watch it there. And as a result, I think this is where 13 Reasons Why really, really screwed up, because instantly for the season 2 premiere, we have a 6.9 here, which is well below where the show was just a year ago. And throughout the season, only within the low 7s to high 6s here, until we get to the very, very last episode here, which instantly set a record low with a 6.3 there. By the time, before I go into that though, but even due to that, season 2 was still huge, right? It was still one of Netflix's biggest, surpassed the first season in terms of total viewership and streaming. So of course they had to do season 3, right? This came out a year afterwards as well, and started off again super, super low here, even lower than what we'd seen previously, with a 6.2 all throughout the 6s here, which is obviously not a great way to go for any show here, especially on IMDb. That's really one of the lower ends here. A couple in the 7s here, but again, we end with a disappointing 6.2 there for the last episode. Again, a record low there. And because of this, people were really starting to doubt the longevity of this show. A lot of people didn't watch season 3 because season 2 really let them down. And by the time season 4 came out, they were pretty much just pushing it to milk as little as they could at the very, very end of it. Of course, another year or so, even less time actually, August to June, so not even a year, which I think it was a really, really bad move on their part. But again, here we get into the 5s, and this is the point where 13 Reasons Why instantly shifted from becoming one of the best and most recognizable dramas to one of the most infamous and hated on TV here. It did manage to pull itself back up with the finale. There 7.7, which is where the beginning was for the show, and where it stands now on IMDb. We saw a 7.5 overall, but considering those great scores we saw in season 1, it should have had a much, much better reputation onward if they had just left it there from the very beginning. So hopefully Netflix has learned their lesson there and has talked to some people about Squid Game and said, we can't screw this up, right? We can't have another 13 Reasons Why on our hand. If they do manage to do a season 2, I wouldn't expect it until maybe like spring of 2023, right? Give them a year and a half, even 2 years if they need it, maybe fall of 2023 even, to really develop and really put all the pieces together to make it as good as it possibly can. And then at that point, let it go and see how the audience reacts to it. Because as it stands right now, 8.2, I think that's a very, very notable, accomplishment. I think everyone should be very, very proud of that. I really hope that in previous seasons, if it ends up happening, that doesn't, go the way of 13 Reasons Why. So again, if you have any thoughts on this one as well, what side are you on here? Do you like binging? Are you more of a week-to-week person? I definitely, like I said, love the week-to-week format. It gives me something to look forward to each week, which is very exciting. But if you have some different points or different, opinions on that, definitely let me know in the comments there. My final topic of the podcast here, and the last thing I want to go over before we wrap up here relatively quickly, is the discussion surrounding politics in TV here. This is something that we've briefly touched on prior in the show, in some previous episodes as well, but we haven't really gone in depth with it, and we've never really had a discussion as to why this might be here. As you can tell, the political field in the U.S. right now is just always all over the place, right? Always scattered. There's always some sort of controversy surrounding it. It is just a mess when you try to talk about politics with just about anyone, right? Chances are you're going to have disagreements there, and it's going to end pretty ugly there. Even if you're on the same side sometimes, it doesn't always go as smoothly as it could. And especially when you try to incorporate some of those topics and some of those discussions into entertainment, people always are very, very vocal in their displeasure for it. We have plenty of examples to go over in terms of just standard shows and some pretty common instances where this has happened. For example, on certain medical shows right now with COVID-19, right? COVID, of course, the most probably prominent news story of the past year and a half, and medical shows incorporating it into their plots for several episodes. You can see this on The Good Doctor. You can see this on Chicago Med. You can see this on Grey's Anatomy. You can see this on The Resident. You can see this on New Amsterdam. It doesn't matter, what the show is. If it takes place in a hospital, I guarantee you they had a COVID storyline at some point over the past year or so. And it's not just contained to dramas either. Stuff like Blackish, for example, as well. Something that we've talked about previously. The most recent season of Blackish there talked about COVID as one of its big plot points. The character of Bo, who is a nurse on the show, had a lot of storylines regarding COVID, and it just came off very preachy. It came off very, like we have to do... they were kind of enforcing things in the show that were different than what was going on at the country at the time, and it just felt like they didn't really fully know how to have this conversation in a very proper way that wasn't going to alienate viewers like it did. And as a result, a lot of people checked out of it. It became the lowest rated season of the entire show, both critically and commercially, in terms of the overall Nielsen ratings there. And it was, again, because people didn't want to have that in their entertainment when they're trying to escape it in the real world, right? Quarantine and everything was a big, big event for a lot of people that it was, a depressing time. It was a hard time for a lot of people to recover from all the tragedy and all the, hardship that was going on in the country. And seeing that play out on TV when you're just trying to, forget about your problems and kind of forget about those things. You just want to have something to come home to relax to take your mind off of it. And then, having to go back into some of those conversations there is just not what people wanted. And we have other issues as well, not just COVID, but you have things like police brutality, the racial tension that was going on in the country as well, with things like George Floyd, which was played out on shows like Law and Order SVU. Their premiere episode from season 22, which was last year's season, had a case that was very similar to what was going on with George Floyd and the police brutality and discrimination and all that. And it was not executed well at all. People were very upset by it. Did not capture fully the whole story regarding George Floyd. It was very much just sanitized through one perspective of it, just the perspective of the law enforcement there, as SVU focuses, of course, on the detectives. And that's why a lot of people were kind of put off by it, because there were a lot more different viewpoints that they could have taken the story in, and there just wasn't enough time within the episode, of course, to focus on all those things. It was just too big of a story, too big of an event to kind of meld down into a 40-minute TV episode. It just wasn't. They just weren't capable of doing that. And as a result, again, the premiere had some of the lowest numbers that we've seen, both commercially and critically, on places like IMDb. Fans just not happy about it. When they came back earlier this year in 2021, they just had a more traditional storyline on SVU, something much more, friendly in terms of its appeal to a lot of people. Just traditional, good old fashioned. You're the bad guy and we're the cops and we're here to arrest you type storyline. Didn't focus on politics. Didn't have racial, conversations in there. And as a result, the IMDb scores were much higher, and the viewership nearly doubled what it had done the season previously. So even after all these examples, right, even after all of these different shows that enforce politics, that put in these storylines that people are very vocal that they don't like, right? People are very, very outspoken that this is not something they want to see. Why does it keep happening the way it does, right? Why is it so common to see all of these storylines be put into these shows? And I think you have your answer, and I think I have your answer for you in the way that these news stories are so prominent nowadays on other types of shows and within other mediums there. The great thing about spoiler TV here is that for any given day that they post the network the network preliminary numbers and the final numbers here, they also post the cable numbers regarding different shows on cable there in the same way. So this is just a basic chart here. If we just look at, this was last Wednesday here as I record this on the 20th, we have the broadcast ratings for all the main networks here. But if we scroll down here, we also have the cable numbers here. This is what they will show. It'll be the top 150 different cable shows for the day here. You can see there, top 150. And obviously they can't go over everything because cable is so expansive and there's so many shows being broadcast 24/7 on cable there. But they'll go over the ones that are the most important there based on the 18 to 49 demographics, and then they'll post the total viewership in millions there. And what's really interesting about this is you can see there's lots of shows that you might recognize here. There's like Real Housewives, there's the NHL, WNBA, lots of sports in here from like ESPN. There's stuff like what's another one? History in here. You have Food Network we saw. There's TLC in here, Nickelodeon, right? They have all the kids stuff in here. They have Discovery Channel, they have Bravo, all your basic kind of cable stations that you might be familiar with there. But what's interesting is there's one in particular that is always getting very, very high numbers in viewership there that I feel like is contributing to these TV stations and these networks enforcing politics into their own shows there, and that is Fox News here. Fox News, one of the biggest news stations on TV right now. Disclaimer, of course, in terms in the way that Fox News is very controversial. There's going to be a large group of people that is completely going to disregard them and anything they have to say because they're very conservative, very right-leaning. But there's a very, very large group of people as well that will follow almost everything that they put out and will watch them religiously there. And one of the biggest names from Fox News that always does well in terms of the viewership there is Tucker Carlson. You can see here he has a premium time slot, 8 o'clock at every single weekday, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. His show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, is always one of the top rated, not only on cable, but overall on TV here. You can see here the example I have pulled up, 3.34 million viewers on his show there. And it's not just him. We also have people like Sean Hannity here on Fox News as well with a very solid 3 million. We have their 5 o'clock show called The Five, which is just like a panel of different news reporters coming together to talk about the news of the day. Again, over 3 million there as well. You can see Fox News on the network slot here takes up a considerable portion of the top 25 slots there. But let's compare that 3 million number to some of the network shows here. If we go back up here, you can see this is the kind of show that's going to beat out stuff like the Goldbergs. It's going to beat out stuff like the Wonder Years here. It's going to beat out stuff like Tough as Nails, Alter Ego, Home Economics. It's going to match stuff like CSI Vegas. It's going to beat out stuff like Superstar, whatever that is on ABC. It's going to beat out all of those shows or match some of those shows there. and it's doing it in a much, much smaller sort of way, because cable is not accessible to everybody. You have to go out and seek it. You have to pay for it. And imagine, if Tucker Carlson or Fox had a, premium slot on network TV, the amount of numbers that they could put up by comparison there. And that's just, a random example. If we just take a look at another week there, we see him, Tucker Carlson, the Hannity, and Five all within the top 10. Again, competing against a ton of sports here. We have wrestling in here. We have, the MLB, which is obviously going to be a huge, event for a lot of people. But here we have the pregame show, on TBS, getting a fraction of what Fox News can put up. And again, some of their other, bigger shows as well, all within the top 20, easily beating out as well some of the other news stations like MSNBC, right? Rachel Maddow, which herself is getting considerable numbers as well there. We scroll down here, beating out ESPN, beating out TLC, Discovery, all those other ones here. What if we just take a look at a random one from August here? Let's see where he lands. He lands right here, about 2.8, right, as far as his millions go, in the top 10 once again. So, again, I could go on and on here, but I think you guys get the point that his reach is significant as hell, and it's because of the fact that he is getting so much traction, and so many people are willing to watch him or watch cable news as opposed to watch just regular entertainment, that these networks get the indication that those are the stories that they want to see here. So they incorporate some of those politics, they incorporate some of those plot lines into their own shows to kind of match and kind of gain some of their own viewers from people like Tucker Carlson, for instance. And as a result, you get two very, very different perspectives on it. One side that says we love this and we want to see these things talked about, and these shows are very important as kind of a stepping stone in discussing these in the real world. And the other side, people like me, for instance, who do not want to see the politics been brought up into entertainment, and we want to see a clear line dividing, what is news and what is for entertainment purposes. And especially on shows like the Wonder Years or something, or Blackish, like we said earlier, which is, meant to be funny, meant to be a sitcom, lighthearted, obviously something that will distract you from the real world events going on. Definitely do not want to see it crossbreed into stuff like that either. But because of these numbers here, and because of the sudden interest in politics, some people have gotten the idea, that these network stations should try to incorporate their own news shows into their primetime lineups here. The great thing also about Spoiler TV is that it allows for comments on all of these posts here, and these guys are excellent, man. Going to any of these comment sections, seeing people's theories, seeing what shows they think are more likely to get canceled or renewed, and seeing different people's opinions on the shows is great as well. This is like a daily thing now that I go to, and I routinely look at some of these comment sections to just, kind of find that community of people that are really, really into TV and love discussing the more, technical sides of it. But there's this one gentleman called Doug Barone here who is very, very active within the comment sections, and he took notice of this sudden interest in the news, right, and politics as well. And he proposed this idea that ABC specifically, a couple things why ABC, in particular should be very, very, should do this as opposed to what they have now. For one, the fact that their schedule is obviously not doing so well. We've talked about that before. Their primetime dramas, their 10 o'clock dramas, definitely scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of viewerships, and many of their shows kind of on the lower end of that chart we saw earlier. But the other main thing is that their news in particular is one of their highest rated and one of the most prominent elements of their identity as a TV station. Their nightly news with David Muir at the 6 o'clock or 6:30 is often the highest rated of any of the evening newses against NBC and CBS. GMA is the highest rated of any of the morning shows. They have stuff like Nightline in lieu of a different late night show. They have Jimmy Kimmel, and then they have stuff like Nightline, which is the evening news as well. And a lot of their specials in regards to some of their on-air personalities, like 2020, for instance, often beat out stuff like Dateline that do a very similar style. They're very impartial to one side or the other, so they don't have, what like Fox News has, where they're completely biased and they only focus on one side. They're pretty, neutral in that regard. And many polls have shown that they are the most trusted of any of the major, outlets there, even over stuff like CNN or, CBS, which also promote this very, unbiased and very neutral side of it. ABC just seems to have a really good knack for these types of programs. So this guy was theorizing that they should impart a 10 o'clock news program that's very similar to GMA, very, structured similarly to that. They already do a bunch of different GMA shows throughout the day as well. They have their morning, and then they have one at like 10 o'clock or something, which is like their third hour of it. So that's why you see here they're calling it GMA4, quote unquote, as far as this potential show that he's proposing there. But essentially, his reasoning behind it is that even if it wasn't more popular, even if it wasn't the most intriguing or interesting show on TV, it would be a lot cheaper to produce than what they have on now. And if it could match the numbers that they have for some of their dramas, which, let's be honest, would not be a very high bar, they could impart some of their resources that they could save from doing this show into bigger projects down the line, and could have a much, much more successful like 2022 style season or something like that. So his theory would basically promote this 5 days a week, very similar to Tucker Carlson, and would have really good lead-ins for some of these shows. You'd put it behind some of the bigger shows that they have on now, like The Rookie, Dancing with the Stars, the proposed LA Law spinoff, like we talked about earlier, or reboot rather, their lineup of comedies, Grey's Anatomy, things like that. And it would be at 10 o'clock there very consistently. And I think this is a really interesting theory. I don't know how much traction it would have in terms of if it actually, happened in reality, how many people would be interested in watching something like that. But definitely, I think could be a stronger kind of intrigue than what they're doing now, because ABC is definitely facing the most challenges of any of the main networks right now in terms of their dramas specifically. And I think one of the main reasons why is because they are one of the heaviest users of this, imparting politics into their shows. And so I think if they, drew the line very clearly as to when, those discussions would be brought up and when it would be appropriate to have those sorts of conversations, they can improve their ratings a lot more than some of the other networks could, because they would be much more distinctive on, the types of audiences that would watch those shows in particular there. Personally, I don't think I would watch it. I'm not really someone that watches the news all that much anymore. I just try to avoid it, just in general, more or less, just because it's just not healthy to get wrapped into it and sucked into it all that much. But I'm definitely curious if anyone out there would be more willing to watch a news type show that often, as opposed to just regular TV or just regular dramas like they have now. Definitely interested in seeing if anyone out there would be interested in doing so. So that is it for this episode. That was the last topic that I wanted to go over with you guys there. I hope you guys did enjoy this one. Let me know, like I said, any thoughts that you have in the comments as well. I would love to have some great discussions with you down there about anything that we went over during this episode. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe as well so you don't miss any of the new ones there. I'm going to try to have a new episode for you next week here with a couple special guests, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be exciting. And with that in mind, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.